We have this monkey brain and we just keep thinking and thinking. And as entrepreneurs, we're like, what's the next thing? What am I doing? What am I concerned about? All of these problems. I find it hard to sit, but in yoga, the movement plus the breath gives me the ability to calm the mind. A lot of times we ignore people and we get things right. I think that stepping back sometimes and understanding that it's okay to slow down sometimes to get the foundation right. What is it that I want to build where I want to be? I think if you can answer that question strongly, you're at a great path to success, but it needs to be intentional. Business coach, I think, is a catalyst along that path. They don't do it for you, but they give that push. The founders that send regular email updates about the company are more successful than those that don't.
Welcome to Success Story. I'm your host, Scott Clary. The Success Story podcast is part of the HubSpot podcast network. Now, HubSpot is the resource that you need to tap into if you are an entrepreneur. It's no secret that starting a business is hard. Even if you have an amazing idea, bringing it to life can feel overwhelming. With HubSpot's new entrepreneurship kit, you can go from idea to IPO with the help of a company that knows a thing or two about growing better. This all-inclusive kit gives you step-by-step guidance and frameworks to help you crush every stage of starting a business. With tools tailored to help all steps of the entrepreneurial journey, it's packed with templates for project management, emails, skill development templates. There's also a solopreneur guide. It's got freelancing, pricing worksheets, and lots more that you can use to get up and running immediately. And best of all, it's free. With expert guidance and frameworks from HubSpot, starting a business doesn't have to be hard. So don't wait to start yours. Go to HubSpot.com/ENT to download the guide right now. David, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you coming on. When I look at your resume, there's a lot of fun stuff that we can go into. However, I thought that it was interesting when I sort of looked at all the different things that you identify as. You're a founder, you're an investor, but you're a father, but also you're a yoga enthusiast. And I think it's interesting because I think that really speaks to how much you care about health and wellness. And I think that everybody who's listening to this will expect me to go into the business conversation right away, but I want to flip it around and I want to sort of speak about why health, wellness. You've spoken about a ton of different topics, diet, meditation, and different podcasts. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, so I actually just came from a Pilates class. So I have a really regimented routine for my mornings, right? So like, if you look at my full day is very regimented, like my calendar runs everything, but really the reason is so I can free myself up to do those things that I think are important for health and wellness, right? Like, it's not just so I make meetings on time, like that's probably a benefit, but like everything's on there, like time with my kids, the things I'm doing, like all of those things, right? So my mornings are very much about me. Like I spend the first few hours in the morning, I get up pretty early just naturally. I don't have an alarm clock. I just wake up when I wake up. I go to bed early, so it helps getting up earlier. But I work a few hours, I take my kids to school, and then I go to the gym, right? Like that's my morning routine every day. And then on weekends, it's roughly the same, except I just don't take the kids to school, right? Like that piece drops out, but I keep the rest of that routine going. So obviously I love yoga, love Pilates, lift weights a few days a week. I think breathing is very important, like lots of those things, but it's really focused around that yoga and Pilates, kind of practice once a day at least.
Why is that? Out of all the different things that you could take on in terms of health and wellness, is there a particular reason? Because you seem like a very logical, regimented, process-oriented guy. So like there's a reason why you're doing everything in your life. And this is probably why you've been successful in business and you've allocated time for your family and you've built a beautiful family as well. Like everything is done very purposefully. So why yoga? Why Pilates? What are the reasons?
So like I've tried all sorts of things, right? Like I did triathlons, I did marathons, and I'm a terrible runner. So just full disclosure, right? Like I did those things really because a friend said like you can't do it, so I just did it. I think my downfall, or maybe my mom always says that this is one of the things that's bad about me. I think it's one of the good things about me. Like I'm very all in or nothing, right? Like not just black and white, but like extreme, right? So like take yoga. Like I went to a yoga class or whatever it was, 8-10 years ago. I'm like, I like this. So I went every day the next week. I'm like, okay, I still really like this. So then I did a 200-hour teacher training the next month, right? So like from 0 to 60 very quickly and all in. But really what I found for me was that 60 minutes a day was one of the few times where my brain stopped thinking about other things, right? And I think that that's what we really look for in meditation. And we try so hard. We're like, we have this monkey brain and we just keep thinking and thinking. And as entrepreneurs, we're like, what's the next thing? What am I doing? What am I concerned about? All of these problems. And I find it hard to sit, but in yoga, the movement plus the breath gives me the ability to calm the mind and have that not full 60 minutes, but close to 60 minutes every day where I'm not thinking about those other things.
I love that. And just a point, you know, your personality, I think that's a very common personality in highly successful entrepreneurs, high achievers, where they just, it's almost a blessing that personality is correlated with business building, because that same personality of doing things to an extreme is probably not that different from somebody who gets addicted to really bad shit too. You're just focusing that in a more positive way, but it is this like wild obsession, and then it ends up being a very net positive in your life. But there's a certain kind of personality that's like a little bit outside of what I think most people call normal for an entrepreneur to actually commit so much of their life to building this thing. And you've done it several times, and you work with, you know, tons of different people that build it in your portfolio company. So you see it again and again and again and again. But I just think it's an interesting personality quirk, and I don't think it's that uncommon. But, you know, I think my parents sometimes say the same thing.
Yeah, my mom still doesn't like it. I think it's difficult to live with. So my girlfriend probably doesn't like it either. But I think the other thing I noticed too is if I look at some of the best programmers and developers inside of our companies, they have similar traits that are applied differently, right? So like they're extremely, you know, connoisseurs of coffee or beer or something, but it's extreme, right? And I think those people also perform the best from a development standpoint because they're just as extreme when it comes to testing, when it comes to what they're actually producing. So finding ways to apply that obsession in a healthy way is probably good for a lot of people, and it comes out in different places, right?
Yeah, I think that's 100% on point. You started this mindfulness portion of your life after you were building Grasshopper, I'm assuming, right? This is the yoga, the Pilates. Was this at a later stage, or was this during?
It was, but so like if I look back at the history, so when I was building Grasshopper, the very early days, I was tremendously unhealthy, working crazy numbers of hours, overweight, eating crappy food. Like that wasn't a priority. I did shift pretty early in that journey, probably call it 2 years in. And I'm like, I remember the day I'm like, these jeans don't fit again. I'm like, this is a problem. I don't feel good about it, so I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
I did a different extreme thing at that time, which was I ran the Boston Marathon from never running more than like, you know, outside for fun, right? Like just playing games, never have run for a period of time. Trained through the winter in Massachusetts and ran the Boston Marathon. Not fast.
No, but good for you. And thank God you didn't have a heart attack jumping into something like that.
I then went there and said, okay, like I'm just going to go all in on this. And I started doing triathlons. I did a half Ironman in Austin. I kept doing those things. So I was able to lose weight and probably be more healthy than before, but I was killing my body, right? Like that extreme amount of activity was probably not good. I didn't really find yoga and a mindfulness practice until probably 2 years before I sold Grasshopper. So I had more mind space. Also really lucky and happy when I found it. It helped me through the sale process.
Well, so the follow-up question was, how has that changed your ability to make decisions? And how has that changed your ability to think and your clarity of thought and your reasoning and your creativity? Because I think that's a hack. Like people just go balls to the wall when they're building. And like, to your point, where you let your physical, your mental health go, that's pretty unfortunately normal, especially for first time entrepreneurs. And I'm super curious as to how this practice has informed basically everything you've built, including that sale of Grasshopper, which is obviously an incredible sale. We'll talk about that. But then all the other decisions you've made going forward.
Yeah, so I think kind of skipping forward in the story a little bit, the Grasshopper sale, while very successful monetarily, we can talk about how we got there and all those things, was actually really difficult from a mental and personal perspective, right? Taking something that I've been building for 12 years and then just it being gone, right? Like for 12 years, I was the Grasshopper guy, right? Like that's what I did. Like it's what my family knew, friends, like, and then that was just gone. And losing that part of your identity is really, really hard. And I think without a mindfulness practice, and for me, like that focus time in the morning, I don't know how I would have gotten through it, like, because the mind just continues to race more and more and more in those scenarios. And that calming every day on a routine, I think allowed me to slow down and make better decisions about what am I going to do next. I'm not going to rush into something right away, like things like that, but also to be able to sit with the discomfort, right? Like I think if prior to that, I would have run away from it, right? And filled it with something else, a different exercise, a different company, a different thing, right? And filled that gap rather than sitting there with that discomfort and saying, you know what? It's okay to be uncomfortable right now. It's part of this journey and part of this process.
Very, very smart. I'm curious, after you went through this process and you sort of cleared your mind to a degree for the sale of Grasshopper, and if I'm not mistaken, you sold that to Citrix for, this is on record, 175 million, correct? That was the sale price? Is that, yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so that was a great exit. You built, after this, Chargify, that was also acquired by Battery Ventures. And then you've also invested in, I don't even know how many startups, like I'm sure 50, 60 plus different startups. I've heard that you've invested in a whole bunch of other types of businesses as well. I heard you on Bradley's podcast talking about a restaurant you lost money. So you've done a whole bunch of different types of investments. But the question is, looking back at how you built Grasshopper, in the last 2 years, you adopted some super healthy mindset things. And then that probably allowed you to think clearer for the companies that you built after, the companies that you invested in after. What would be because I don't want to go through the whole Grasshopper story, but I would say it's interesting to understand what you did with Grasshopper that you probably shouldn't have done. What were the things that after starting Chargify, growing it, exiting that company, working with 50 different founders, what are the lessons now that you tell people like, hey, I did it for 12 years. It didn't have to take 12 years, or it could have been way easier.
Yeah. So I actually loved that it took 12 years, and it should have been easier. But really what I learned at Grasshopper, and we built Chargify at Grasshopper. It was a lab project. We built all sorts of things. The biggest mistake we ever made was doing this. And it's kind of weird to say that, right? Because Chargify came out of it and was very successful and we exited it. But as a whole, it was a terrible, terrible idea building these things within Grasshopper, right? Like Chargify was successful, yes, but there was lots of them that weren't. We wasted $1 million of capital that we could have invested in the company to do things. We lost our time, the team's time and focus, rather than saying like, let's sell more of the thing we're doing. We're like, no, like we're going to identify this opportunity. We're going to build this thing. It was terrible, right? I think the most important learning for me from that was, besides the distraction, like that was a bad thing. What we really should have understood was we need to be the customer ourselves. Where we failed every single time is when we said, oh, we're going to identify this market. We think that this market operates this way, this customer operates this way, but we're not the customer, right? And for Grasshopper, we were the customer. We were the small business owner that needed the phone system. For Chargify, we built it for ourselves. It was a billing system for us, right? That's why it was successful. The things that weren't were different customers with different needs. So then we had to do this like market research, like all these things happen.
Yeah, super time consuming, super expensive. Yeah. Why? I'm curious though. When you're running, you bootstrap Grasshopper. Like hats off to you for that. That's already wildly difficult to do. You grew it to $30 million, I think ARR. What prompted you to say, hey, I want to look at different market segments. I want to try different technologies. Like what happens in the brain of a founder that creates this need for shiny object syndrome? I mean, it happens to a lot of founders. I'm curious why you thought that trying all these different projects was a good idea, because someone else in this audience is thinking probably at the exact same things that you were thinking. So let's just like, what are those red flags? Like, what are those things that prompted you to say, hey, I want to test this thing out?
Yeah, I think it's two things. One, founders get bored. So we're like, let's just do something else, right? When you then combine that with the plateaus that companies naturally hit, we convince ourselves with these stories that we've saturated the market. We can't grow anymore, right? Because you hit these plateaus at 5 million, 10 million, or whatever the things are. And you're like, growth kind of plateaus a little bit. And we all sit there and then we create this narrative. We advertise too much. We can't do anymore. We've saturated Google AdWords. Whatever the things are we create to tell ourselves a story about why we're at this plateau, rather than investing in the company and saying, what we really need to do is look at new team, new process, new things to move to the next level and get that step change growth over time. And like, really, if you look back at Grasshopper, we were nowhere close to saturation.
I was going to say, no, you could have taken that. You could have, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But like, we created this narrative 3 separate or 4 separate times at Grasshopper, right?
It's so funny how you just get in your own head. You totally get in your own head too. Even when you're successful, you get in your own head. And you have smart people around you. Yeah.
But the more difficult thing is, as the founder, you also then get in your management team's head, right? And you convince them of the story that you've been telling yourself, right? Because they're like, look, I've already followed this leader, right? I believe in he or she, and they've got us thus far. Why should I believe they're not right about this plateau and this saturation or whatever? Yeah. So now you have a group of people all supporting you. It's really hard.
Well, you build this like little echo chamber in your company, because unless somebody is incredibly experienced and they feel comfortable putting their hand up and saying, like, and you've built we'll talk about culture. You've built the psychologically safe culture where somebody can actually put their hand up and say adamantly, like say something that's adamantly different from what you believe as a founder, which is like, it's this weird power dynamic, right? Like very few executives are willing to do that. They're kind of just going to go in line with what you're saying to a degree, and they're going to try and execute it to the best of their ability. But I'm sure you've understood that, you've solved for that. So how do you create this culture, especially in your portcos, where the founder doesn't know best all the time, and you have to create this psychologically safe culture where somebody is going to stick their hand up and challenge the founder so that they don't fall into that same trap?
I think what's even more difficult is we had a culture of that, and people did raise their hands at the beginning, but you become so convincing over time. And as a founder, you're just like, sometimes I'm just going to do things, right? So like, people probably told us you shouldn't build these companies internally. I know we had conversations about the distraction and the problems we were going to cause, but as founders, we ignored it, right? It wasn't that people didn't say it. We just kind of bulldozed them because we were bored, or we created this narrative, right? That's the danger, right? Because as founders, there's this push and pull of this power, right? And a lot of times it's successful, right? Like a lot of times we ignore people and we get things right, right? That's why companies have step changes. That's why these things happen and innovation happens. But sometimes we do the same thing with a negative result, and we go over someone, or we just do what we're going to do, right? So it's a push and pull.
Yeah, it's just something to be aware of, I think, more than anything, because I think that every founder is going to get themselves into this trap at some point. So I think it's just to be cognizant of that and just to be aware of your own biases as well when you're building something. One thing I found fascinating is the fact that you were 17 when you started Grasshopper. Is that correct? Because that's
I was a little bit older than that. I was in high school, college, but I had started another company in high school when I was
okay. But still, that's super, super young. That's not even Stanford grad entrepreneur avatar, right? That's incredibly young. So what was it? Was it your parents were entrepreneurial? Like, what made you want to start something so young?
Yeah. So a few things. Like, my dad and my grandfather were very entrepreneurial. My mom was very much focused on education. So it was a very interesting household because we had this dual focus on how important education can be, but also how important it can be doing your own thing, right? And independence and building. So I think there's part of that. The other piece that was really important for me, and I say this very specifically, is I overcame a very difficult learning disability in my early years. So I was years behind in reading and writing. I went to tutoring 5 days a week. Luckily, my parents could afford to spend that money to give me the gift of learning how I learn, right? And then, now I can read and write, obviously, but, that gift taught me how to learn, right? So I used that through the rest of my life for how do I pick up information and how do I learn and understand things. So I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. Like, I remember back to not preschool, but like, whatever grades. Like,
whenever you were young as hell. Yeah.
Like whatever, doing stuff on the computer and building websites and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When last year of high school, I founded a company, Return Path. I was on the early team. I built the original software, helped raise a lot of capital and bring in a management team. But I had this decision point. Do I go to college or do I keep doing this? And I was all on keep doing this. This was, the early 2000s, 99, 2000, 2001, roughly, in New York on Broad Street with all the internet companies right across from Wall Street. Like, it was fantastic. My mom convinced me to go to college, and I picked one college I wanted to go to.
Hey guys, Scott here. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say a heartfelt thanks to every single one of you. 6 years of this show, and it's really all because of you. Your listens, your support, your shares, it's what keeps this thing going. When I started, I had no idea how big this would get, how many lives we touch, the stories we share, the lessons that we learn together. It's truly humbling, and I believe that we're building something really special here, a community where no one has to reinvent the wheel. We're all in this together, learning and growing. And here's my ask. If you love this show, if it's made a difference for you, please share it with somebody who needs it. Tell a friend, post on social, whatever works. It's the best way to keep this thing going strong, bring on even better guests, and share more life-changing wisdom. And you can find us on all the spots. So you can go to successstorypodcast.com if you like listening to podcasts. If you like video, you can go to YouTube. It's youtube.com/c/Scott D. Clary, or the newsletter.scottdclary.com. Just spread the word. I'm eternally grateful for each and every one of you. Let's keep learning, let's keep growing, and let's keep making this world a little bit better together. All right, let's get back to the show. I also want to understand at that age how you raised capital, because I know, again, a lot of people listening to this, they're going to come up with every excuse in the book as to why they can't raise money. They don't have enough experience to start, whatever. You just said, F that. I'm going to lean into this. How do you demand the authority to raise capital, like last year of high school, for right before you go to college? What was the strategy to get people to trust that you're going to not totally lose every single dollar they put into you?
I mean, look, I had a great co-founding team, right?
Yeah.
Older than me, so had experience on capital raising, had internet companies, right? So like, they brought me into that space and I learned a lot.
I love it.
I was definitely not the core capital raiser, zero chance about that. But I learned a tremendous amount being in those rooms. And what I brought was I built the technology. And at that time, it was kind of cool and interesting for VC companies to say, this young kid is doing this, right? And that, I think, gave us an advantage in the capital raising more than a disadvantage, right?
You were like almost like a little bit of like a child prodigy, like building out this piece of tech.
I just wasn't smart enough to be called that. I just happened to build technology that worked well, right?
I love that. And when you started building out Grasshopper, what was the thesis behind that?
It was actually quite simple. Like, we were building it for ourselves. Me and my co-founder each had our own small little company doing whatever. And we're like, what we want is a professional image, a phone number that's not our cell phone, not our house phone. You don't want your mom picking up the phone, right? Like, we knew the problem and we said, this is solvable, right? Like, there have been phone systems for 40 years. There just hasn't been a virtual one the way we want it, right? Like, you have to buy hardware and install it and have it and all. Like, we're like, no, we don't want any of that. We're in a dorm room. Like, so we built it for ourselves. And I think combined with a lucky timing, right? So one is we built the right thing. We understood the customer because it was us, but then it was also lucky timing that we could buy traffic and customers at a really low price. That dynamic doesn't exist today anymore, right? Like, this was before AdWords. This was amateur, like where you were paying quarters of a cent, right? Like very cheap.
I love this. So, I mean, this is I'm sure this is what you now look for when you're investing in companies, like founders that are solving their own problems, or maybe founders that come from an industry that are solving problems. I think that massively increases the chance of your success and when you're building a business, because it seems like this is what you've done repeatedly. You built Grasshopper for yourself. You built Chargify to solve a problem you had, and it was also successful. So this seems to be like the framework when you're trying to find some semblance of product market fit, like just solve problems that are present in your own life, which seems like common sense, but we all know common sense isn't common. But you take Grasshopper to market. It's obviously you have paid ads, customers are converting. How fast does Grasshopper start to grow?
Very fast. And I think that we were lucky on the timing of the ability to purchase ads, but also the kind of change in the economy, right? Like 2004, 5, 6, 7, it was a difficult time. But what came out of that is people were starting their own companies, right? Like as people were departing jobs, being fired, things like that, downsized, they're like, you know what? I could be an independent consultant. I can do this on my own. So we had an uptick in new companies, right? And we relied on new companies for our customers, right? Like it's hard to convert someone who's been around for a long time compared to someone who's starting a new company, a new phone number, right? Like they just kind of mesh together. But from a growth standpoint, we were profitable in our second month. Wow. We had a positive cash cycle, which allowed us to grow. We got to $1 million far quicker than we ever imagined, and started to have to hire employees and do things. They couldn't just be us anymore, right? And that speed was not what we ever expected.
And a lot of people can sort of fumble when they're growing at that pace, because there's a lot of things that are all moving at the same time, and it's stressful, it's difficult. Everybody who's listening to this is probably praying that they have a business that eventually grows at a pace that they can't keep up with, but I'm sure that it's happened to a few of them. What would be like the best advice you have when you've nailed product market fit, nailed timing, your customers are like pouring in? How do you not screw that up? And I know it sounds silly, but I'm sure that you can screw it up quite easily if you don't pay attention to reducing churn, spinning up servers, customer uptime, especially for phone systems, which are kind of a mission critical thing for businesses. Like, how do you not fumble that?
I mean, we did fumble, right? Like we made a lot of mistakes along the way. And the real danger is sales hide everything, right? So in a growing company, all sorts of things can be going wrong. Culture can be going wrong. People can be going wrong. Product can be going wrong. But if sales are growing at that pace, it's all hidden, right? Like, because no one's looking at anything else. Even if you're trying to, you're just not, right? And I think that stepping back sometimes and understanding that it's okay to slow down sometimes to get the foundation right. We didn't have our core values specified and written out and communicated. Big mistake, right? We then had to go back and redo that. And it wasn't, we weren't changing the values. What we were doing was writing them down, saying them, and then putting them into systems and processes, right? Like those types of things, when you're growing, just are hidden, right?
Yeah. And like, it's almost like you were trying to keep up with the growth like you were a venture back, but actually you had the luxury of not taking on capital. So you didn't have investors that were needing, X% growth year over year. You actually could have chilled a little bit, which is something that, I mean, this is like sort of a whole other conversation about taking on money.
You can't, right? Like, yeah. It's really hard. Like you see customers pouring in, you're like, I'm not slowing down. I'm going faster, right? Which is why maybe at the beginning we should have been more conscious and, intentional about some of these foundational activities that we didn't do. But we were bootstrapped. Like, I'm okay with how it went, right? Like we did the things we had to do to get there.
Oh yeah, no, I think it went, listen, it went fabulous. But all I'm pointing out is the things that if you did it again, what are the things that are different? And I guess it's really good to be clear on like, what are those foundational elements that you're building from scratch right now? What do you have to get dialed in as like a new entrepreneur so that you don't have to go back and revisit them, which just takes more mental bandwidth and it just creates stress and anxiety and it probably takes some money to solve problems that could have been solved much earlier on. What are those like core pieces for a startup that you'd recommend people actually dial in right away?
I think that those are one, core values and core purpose. Make sure that intentional, written, and then integrated right away. So hiring, firing, everything that's happening, right? Like this should be public on the website. It should be everywhere because these are coming from you as a founder anyway, right? So this isn't that much work early on. It becomes a lot more work later. That's the challenge. The other piece is start to think about where you can be most effective with systems and processes without overburdening the company. So I think about this a lot about communications. I'm a big believer in the daily, weekly, monthly meeting rhythm, huddle, whatever you want to call it, whatever process. There's lots of things you can do. If it's EOS, if it's Vern, it doesn't really matter. But like those things integrated earlier are much easier to do than later and give you tremendous upside, right? So like we think about that much earlier, like in the very first days. How do we do these things now, right? And then the last piece is thinking about the environment that I want to build, right? Is that all remote? Is that all in the office? And I'm a big believer in one of the two, not a hybrid. So like, what is it that I want to build where I want to be? And I think if you can answer that question strongly, you're on a great path to success, but it needs to be intentional.
I was having a conversation yesterday with Chris Savage, who's the founder of Wistia, excuse me, I was mispronouncing. And he was talking about culture and what it is and what it isn't. And he actually went a step further, and I'm curious about your view on this. He said that culture actually informs how people within the company deal with problems. But what culture should also really do is say, for example, how somebody on the sales team responds to a customer inquiry. And I'm curious if you ever found that there was some semblance of that in Grasshopper or any of the other companies, just an example of how like a good culture, a strong culture can actually help somebody make a decision that benefits the company so they understand the place where they're operating from versus just, we're a great group, we're all ethical, whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So culture is how we do things, not what we do, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a reasonable example, but let me take it one step further and how we thought about this, right? So we had a customer service group dealing with hundreds of thousands of customers, and there's all of these requests for credits and refunds, right? For all sorts of reasons. And we could have done what is typical, which is you create a playbook that says for this, you do this, you allow this much dollars to be done, you create all these rules, right? We didn't do that at all. And we said, you know what? You can give any amount of credit or refund you think is reasonable if next to it, you select from the dropdown one of our core values and you write why it matches.
Oh, I like that. I love that a lot. Okay.
And so like this was very intentional and specific. Like we told like our core purpose was empowering entrepreneurs to succeed, right? We would have a very typical thing happen, which is, hey, I signed up for Grasshopper. I printed my business card. I put the wrong phone number on there. Okay. We had requests for, can you get me that phone number? Obviously we tried as best we could. Okay. You can't get me that phone number. I want a credit or refund for the amount of the printing of the cards. Wasn't our mistake. Regularly, we would give a refund larger than the amount they had paid us. Because our core purpose was empowering entrepreneurs to succeed. We don't want to kill them at the first step, right? Like if you're asking us for a $200 refund, that must be meaningful to you, right? At the beginning stages of your company. We're not going to stand in your way there, right? And that's a small example, but that's about how you connect the values with the actions that are being taken, how we do things compared to creating rules.
I love this. And that's such a good, it's such a good implementation of what culture should be, because I feel like, again, it's just a word that's discussed a lot. And I feel like a lot of businesses really miss the mark on what it actually is and how it impacts like the day in the life of the actual employee. Something that I thought was interesting in sort of your professional, your professional career, you hired a business coach, and you said that was a game-changing decision for you. What prompted you to bring that in, bring in the business coach, help you with growing the business? Why was that such a life-changing change for somebody who's already sort of killing it in their own business?
I mean, that allowed us to really create a lot of the things that we're discussing today. Like, that's when we specified the core values. It's when we put in the daily, weekly, quarterly meetings. That's when we created process around all this stuff, because we made a decision that we couldn't just run around like crazy entrepreneurs anymore. We had to create something that created a structure where our team could win, right? Okay. Shifting from having a bunch of doers, right? Like someone who comes to me and says, okay, David, what do I do next? I say, okay, go do this, come back to me, to a bunch of thinkers who say, David, here's what I'm going to do and why, and I'm going to come back to you with the results, right? And doing that is a very different set of people and processes and things that have to happen in a company. And so we had to educate ourselves as entrepreneurs how to do that. And a business coach, I think, is a catalyst along that path. They don't do it for you, but they give that push, right? And that kind of external view and knowledge to make that happen.
Do you feel like that's a significantly different person than what like a mentor would be? Like, just frame that for the audience, because there's a lot of business coaches out there. There's a lot of mentors, there's a lot of people that sell consulting services. I think it's a very difficult thing to figure out for somebody who's building, who's working nonstop. They know they need help. They don't know who they should actually turn to. And there's just a minefield of different figures out there that they could choose from that can take their money and help them, or take their money and not help them. So, I mean, I agree completely, but I also think that it's just stressful to find the right person. How do you do it when you're running at, 1,000,000 miles a minute? You have 1,000 things on your plate. Where do you look?
Yeah. This is a danger zone, right? Like,
yeah.
To your point, there's a lot of people out there who make a lot of claims and charge a lot of money. The process that I took was I identified the framework I wanted to use, and I went to the person that built that framework and said, I want your top coach. I don't want anyone else. I don't care how much the person costs. I don't care what the schedule is. I want that person, right? So that for me filtered out a lot of the junk, right? Like, I wasn't listening to inbound calls. I identified something I wanted and identified the person I wanted, right? Just like you identify an employee, right? Like you go out and you look for the specific thing you want and need at that time, right? And the other important thing is a mentor and a business coach are very different things. Mentors are not necessarily sitting there in the quarterly meeting, running process, doing this across 10 or 15 different companies, doing this day in and day out, where a coach is and has a framework to use that they've proven and done in other places, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the last really important point is you change these people over time. Just like employees, you outgrow the needs of, or what you need from that coach at that time, right? The company outgrows them, where they've been, the experiences they've had, the things that they can implement. So you have to change these people over time.
I mean, that could be said for even like your executive team. Like there's a case to be made for the founder's good to bring the company to 1 million or 10 million, then you bring in a CEO, and that CEO is maybe good to bring the company from 10 million to 50 or 10 million to even 100. And then there's a different CEO for, post going public. So it's always about bringing the right people in. I think that's probably just a great sort of rule to live by, but also with business coaches. I think it's important that you highlighted the difference between a mentor and a business coach, because I feel like what a lot of entrepreneurs do is they look for the most impressive person on paper, regardless or not if this person is functioning as a coach and has frameworks, and they try and reach out to them and they say, hey, can I grab a coffee? Hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And I feel like there's a lot of well-meaning people that will sit down and help an entrepreneur. But I think there's something to be said for, like you mentioned, somebody that does this every single day and somebody that has those frameworks in place, as opposed to just giving this ad hoc advice that is probably useful, but also could be slightly outdated sometimes. So I think that that's actually a very, very important point. Like, if you're going to align with people, align with the right people. And these are people that are sort of like set up.
They serve different functions, right? Like, they're not more valuable or less valuable. They serve different functions. A mentor serves a certain function, right? And you probably do want someone that is highly experienced, someone who's older maybe, someone who has deep industry knowledge or connections. That serves a purpose and it's valuable. a business coach is likely someone who's not known, right? Like the best coaches are not known, right? Like if you think back to sports, we know some of the coaches' names, but not many, right?
Yeah.
From a championship team perspective or whatever, we know the players' names because the coaches are there to serve a very valuable function, but it's not necessarily to be on the floor.
I just want to take a second and thank the HubSpot Podcast Network for supporting Success Story. The HubSpot Podcast Network has incredible podcasts like The Product Boss, hosted by Jacqueline Snyder and Minna Kunlo Sithep. If you want to take your physical product sales and strategy to the next level to create your dream life, you need to listen to The Product Boss. They sit down for an hour. They do a workshop-style podcast. They're going to talk about everything that you need to know to up-level yourself. Social media, marketing, if you're in consumer packaged goods, if you have any sort of physical widget, you need to tune into The Product Boss wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll tell you something, even if we know the main coach, we don't know the goalie coach, we don't know the assistant coaches, and they're all so important to making the team function. And they all have incredible experience, right? Walk me through the actual exit event. So when you were selling Grasshopper to Citrix, did you use an investment banker? Did you source a deal on your own? Did Citrix come to you? What are the lessons of selling a company for that amount of money?
Tons of lessons here, but so process-wise, Citrix came to us. We did not hire. We did not want to even sell. We had no desire. Like we weren't even looking at it, right? They came to us, and it was over a year and a half period, I think, roughly. And the process was quite simple. They came to us and said, we're interested in this space. That was the first call. We're like, okay, cool. We'll have a call about it, whatever. The second call was, we're going to buy something in this space. Okay. That's interesting. Our response was very simply, look, guys, we have a plan. We do our quarterly planning. We know what we're going to do. We're going to deliver on that plan, and we're excited about that plan. We're not interested right now. They came back to us, call that 2 quarters later and said, okay, guys, how are things going? They said, well, we out-delivered our plan and where things are going great. They're like, holy shit, we've made 80 plus acquisitions and no one has ever in that process delivered on the plan they told us they were going to deliver on. But we're like, yeah, but that's because we don't care about selling. Like we're building a company to be here, and we're building a management team and all of those things. So that's how it then progressed, right? The end story there is we did hire an investment bank to run the Citrix process, not a process. So we didn't have competitive bids. We didn't do any of that, but we had an investment bank, a very specific focus of just running through the best practices to get the deal closed and maximize value, right? Because in the negotiations, there's always this, they want to push value down, you want to push value up, meeting somewhere in the middle. We closed at the original offer. So that was a good result. We decreased escrow. We did all the things we needed to do by having a partner in that process. But happy to talk about the learnings too.
Well, no, I am very curious because there's something to be said for doing a deal that looks good on paper and looks good in the press release, whatever. But there's a lot of nuances to how you do a good deal so that it benefits you. And it could be a mixture of a variety of different things. So I'm curious as to what kind of deal outside of the dollar value you negotiated. What are some of the things that founders should think about that they don't normally think about? You had the aid of an investment banking team that probably does this for a living. So they really probably highlighted and acted in your best interests, the things that you should care about. What are some of those things that founders really don't even realize when they're looking to sell?
Yeah. So we always hear about the top line dollar number, right?
Yeah.
But then let's take that step down. Like escrow matters a lot. The size of it, the length of it, all of those things, right? Like, so when you have a deal, how much is held back? What are the terms of that? Even to the detail level of like, is it a tipping basket escrow or not? And how are claims done? All of those things matter a lot. But the most critical thing is what's the percentage, right? Is it 1%, 5%, 50%, 10%, right? Like generally you want to be around 10% in a deal or less. We had some specific carve outs for federal taxes and telecom related things, but like that was an important factor. Another important factor for us was, is Citrix going to keep the brand, right? That doesn't get talked about at all, right? From a perspective, out externally. Internally, this was our second most important thing after dollars. And probably, honestly, we wouldn't even have entertained the dollars if this was not an item. This was a go or no go item.
Right? Why was that? Why was that so important to you to keep the brand?
Because we had invested 12 years of our life building this brand, and we didn't just want to be eaten up into a Citrix product.
Was it worrying that if they just destroyed the brand, like it could impact, like they would like get rid of the people? Or like, what was the thought?
People, the customers, all of those things. Like, so the next layer down, right, obviously is the people. How are they compensated in the deal structure, but also going forward? Are they keeping them or not? Like, we negotiated to make sure every person was kept, and very high retention bonuses and all sorts of things to pay them out even more outside of the deal structure. We also did not have a lot of external equity holders in the company. So we carved out even more money to give in the deal to employees. So they allowed us to do that. There's then all sorts of terms in the APA that matter, asset purchase agreement, that matter and are never discussed, right? And my key learning here was make sure you have a lawyer that understands these deals fully, because a typical lawyer without experience negotiates every deal point. And very quickly what happens is they lose all ability to negotiate, because the other side's like, you know what? I'm done. Yeah. Right? I'm on the other side of this. And as a buyer, I'm like, this is ridiculous, guys.
Yeah.
Like, now you missed all the important stuff that were later on in the document, and I'm not willing to even talk about it anymore, right? Like, not even negotiate. I just won't even talk about it. I'm like, guys, that's it. So making sure this lawyer understands the important pieces and uses their negotiating capital appropriately.
It's very interesting. I've been through several of those kinds of transactions before, where it's just the entire thing's redlined and the buyer is not interested. They're just like, listen, guys, like, this is, I don't have the mental bandwidth to go through all this and to nitpick this word, that word for an entire document for things that are relatively, they're not material and they're not going to affect the transaction to any significant degree. But I've seen it happen before. It's actually very interesting that you brought that up. I don't think I've ever heard anybody note that, but it's actually very, very important, because I think that most people actually believe that if their lawyer does more work, it's like the hallmark and the calling card of a good lawyer to overanalyze, but without thinking that, oh, well, this person's protecting me. But it's actually like they could be killing the deal completely. Very, very interesting.
We've seen it many times, right? Like, the best lawyers understand when to negotiate, when not to.
Yeah.
They should do the least work amount of possible, right? Like, their goal in this type of a lawyering transaction is to close the transaction, right? Like, that's it. Obviously, there's things they want to protect and all the other things, but their paramount goal is a business goal, not a lawyering goal. And I think a lot of junior lawyers forget that. They're like, I went to school. I know better than he or she. Whatever. None of that matters.
So after you, did you stay on after you sold? Were you required to stay?
No, this was an interesting point too, right? So
yeah,
Citrix said, you built a management team that can run this company without you. We can either find you a high-paid, titled position for no reason, or we can pay you more money now and not suck it out of the deal and negotiate you down, in essence, right?
Yeah.
We're like, well, we'll take the cash. That's fine. This emotionally was very difficult, but was the right thing for the company.
Yeah, definitely. And you've never, it's so interesting. I've seen this happen a few times where there's a non-compete for a period of time, and then somebody will try and just go and build something again after that non-compete expires, but you just stepped back from the whole industry. You said, I'm never going to build anything like this ever again. Nice check comes in. And then that's where you turn from operator into investor, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but like, think about this for a second. Like, we weren't building this because we loved phones and telecom, right?
True.
We were building this because our core purpose was empowering entrepreneurs to succeed, right? Like, that's what got us up in the morning and got us excited. Nothing to do with phones, right? Yeah. It happened to be what we were doing.
I love that. And then you found a way to do that in another capacity, really. So when you start going, when you switch gears, when you switch from operator to capital allocator, obviously, I'm sure you've made a few mistakes and lost a little bit or maybe a lot of money with some bad deals. But what do you start to go into? What's the first thing? Because I think now you do a lot of SaaS companies. Talk to me about even, your investment strategy, how it's matured over the past, I don't even know how many years. You started in VC. Did you go into private equity, get some cash flowing stuff? You did that as well, I'm assuming. But where did you start? Where did you end up?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of angel investments. That's the easiest thing to do, right? I worked for a VC accelerator for 3 quarters to see if I liked that. I didn't like it at all, so I moved on pretty quickly. But think about like the angel portfolio. I probably have, I don't know, 75 investments in there. The portfolio as a whole is probably around break even or better. But very quickly, I identified that I was not a great capital allocator at the early stage. So the only reason I make investments anymore at the early stage is if I want to learn something or I want to give back to a founder or something like that. I'm not looking at it from a returns perspective. I also make very few of those investments. Like I only invest pretty much in companies that have product market fit, over $1 million of ARR or revenue, break even or profitable, right? Like that's where I like to play and can contribute. But I'm also very focused on learning. Like, is it an industry or space I want to learn about? That's the return compared to dollars.
I'm very curious because even like for researching for this podcast, I heard you say something that was interesting to me. And you said at one point in your investing career, you were looking for founders that were almost tired of their company. So I think that, and I think it was in 2019 or something like that, you'd said that on a podcast, you were looking for founders that had built something, but they were looking to get out more or less. Is that changed at all? Is that a thesis that you still operate by in terms of like a strategic investment strategy? Is there a reason for that in particular?
Yeah, so that is very specific to companies that we buy, right? So
okay.
About that's not an investment thesis, but a buying thesis, right?
I got
you. So yeah, tired founders who are done with it and have hit that plateau, I think is the very unique opportunity to be able to buy a company that has upside value, but also get a founder out when they want to get out, rather than trying to convince someone at some other point in time, right? So I think it's a very unique scenario.
That's more in line with like a traditional private equity play, where there's some history behind it, and the founder's trying to get out. So you said you look at companies mostly SaaS. What are some other things that you've tried to invest in that haven't worked out so well? I mean, I have a ton of friends who have had exits and they've messed around with different industries, different verticals. I guess at the end of the day, you kind of go back to what you know, which is just a smart thing to do as an investor. What are some lessons, things that you should, not go into?
I mean, I wasted so much time and money in different places. You mentioned that I invested in a restaurant. That was a tremendous loss, millions of dollars. Everyone always says, don't do it. You're like, oh, this is going to be different. It's just,
yeah.
But I think that the draw to that is very interesting and unique from a learning's perspective. The reason I think me and other people do this is because it's something you can point to, right? Like I came from software and my kids didn't really understand, like, what is this thing? I don't understand what he really does. People are like, well, he just runs Grasshopper. I don't really know what it is. But you're like, oh, I understand a restaurant. I eat food. Oh, like that's how people can identify. And I think that's why I make these poor investments. But yeah, I've lost money all sorts of places, but also interestingly learn things I don't like. Like I made money developing real estate in Las Vegas. I didn't like doing it. Like I could have made more easy money doing it. It just wasn't fun or interesting. So I didn't do it.
I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to just sort of unpack. We went into this at the beginning. We were just speaking about your health, your wellness, and I do want to speak about some of the things that you've incorporated into your own life, because you are very much in this biohacking, human optimization mindset, and I think that it's a very important thing for entrepreneurs to understand. But I want to just sort of go into like, your health and wellness and optimization routine. You mentioned that you're so strict about it, and it's very important to you to sort of keep everything in line. So what are the things, like what's the morning routine? What's the health and wellness routine? What's the diet? What are the things that you've incorporated into your life that you feel actually make an impact? Because there's so much out there, and I find that it's hard to figure out, okay, listen, I have the blue light glasses and the cold plunge and the keto and the this and the that, and I I heard you speaking about like gut biome tests and Viome and all these different things that you can do. So after the testing on yourself, where did you land? What actually works? What doesn't? What do you incorporate? What do you say people should check this out or not?
Look, I think the most important thing is it doesn't really matter what works for me. It matters what works for you, right? I think that's the key, and it's finding those things, right? So like I can tell you the stuff that works for me. I eat a ketogenic diet, but I also tried every diet possible. I did vegan, I did low carb, high carb, I did all protein, I did carnivore, I did all these different things, right? To find what worked for me. And I was optimizing for energy and feeling, right? Like, how am I energized? How do I feel, right? Am I bloated, not bloated? Like those types of things. If you think about that, you then find those right things. Similarly for sleep, like I can give a bunch of advice for like what I think is best for sleep. And that's generally go to bed between 9:30 and 10:30, wake up naturally with no alarm clock. Don't eat within 2 or 3 hours of bedtime, right? Like generally those things are right. Can I tell you, like for me, I love my cooling mattress. I think it's fantastic. I come up with all sorts of settings that work for me. That doesn't work for everyone, right? I take magnesium, but I also tested 22 other things, right? Like all of those things are true. So I think if you look at all of those categories, it matters finding what works for you, the individual, to optimize whatever it is.
I'm curious when you take on a diet like a keto diet, obviously it does impact your body fat, your mental ability, your clarity. It impacts your energy levels. But do you find that sometimes when you optimize for something like that, like other parts of your life degrade? Like I'm speaking from personal experience. I've tried keto before, and I find it very hard to maintain in a social environment. I find it just incredibly hard and awkward and uncomfortable. And I'm curious how you balance that. Are you full keto? Are you full into this whenever you go out?
Yeah, I am. I also don't drink anymore. So
Really?
I'm happy to balance those things socially, but I actually found it a benefit. Like the early days, it was hard, right? Like, okay, how do I find something to eat? But what I flipped the script on and said, you know what? I really actually now enjoy going out to a meal and not being focused on the food. Like, I don't care what's on the menu. I don't care what gets ordered. I can actually engage and have conversations with the people at the table and not be focused on what I'm ordering or eating or whatever. Like, I'll just eat nothing at the dinner. Like, it makes no difference to me, right? And that's been very freeing. Similarly with alcohol, like, I feel better not drinking, so I just don't drink, right? It's very simple. Do I have to have the conversations why or whatever? Sure. Or I just say, I'm not drinking today.
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's fair.
That's the easiest thing to answer. No one cares or is interested or whatever. And if it's a group that I know is not going to be interested in the reason, I say that. If it's someone I'm going to engage with, I have a deeper conversation.
I want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, LinkedIn. Now, let me share a quick story. When I was looking to hire for my team, I needed someone who not only had the skills, but also fit our company culture. I turned to LinkedIn Jobs and it made the process seamless. The quality of candidates I found was exceptional and it saved me tons of time. Having quality candidates to interview is essential and LinkedIn Jobs makes it incredibly easy to find them. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It's a platform that connects you with professionals you won't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching but might be open to the perfect role. And did you know that 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites? If you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're missing these candidates. Plus, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours on LinkedIn. And they're always looking to make the process easier. They even launched a feature to help you write job descriptions. So if you're ready to find your next great hire, post your job for free at linkedin.com/excellence. That's linkedin.com/excellence to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. But you know what? I think that most entrepreneurs now are actually more focused on this, on how to optimize themselves. I mean, like longevity, biohacking, like this is very top of mind for a lot of people. And again, it's sort of like business coaches. There's a lot of health and wellness charlatans as well. And they all have a different opinion. And I feel like religion is almost as, health and wellness is almost as bad as religion and politics when it comes to people being these zealots of what they believe in. So I also think it's very important to just test out what works for you. I mean, I think that that's the best advice possible, because I know that there's just so much out there. But I do believe that you can easily be led astray. And I also am a big believer in, you don't have to have the perfect routine to be successful either. I mean, it helps. Bits of it help. But at the end of the day, it's really like, what can you actually maintain for a long period of time? That's what will really impact your life. And yeah, exactly. Like keto. I know for a fact that keto is not just about weight loss with you. It's about, I feel energized. I don't have like a 4 p.m., dip in energy. I, feel alert. I'm actually curious. Do you feel like you can get by with less sleep too, once in a while?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think about how much sleep I get. I measure it with like my Oura ring and stuff.
Yeah. And do you find you get a good sleep score with no carbs? Interesting.
Yeah, but I don't eat no carbs, right? So like, I eat a pretty modified, like I eat very low carb, but I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables actually, right? So like my dessert is whole fruits, not a lot of them. I eat a lot of vegetables. I think it's a pretty bad idea generally to eat no vegetables and eat super low carb. I cut out the things that don't make me feel good. Processed carbs, sugar, flour, things like that. I'll eat raspberries tonight, no problem. I don't care.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Like there is some stuff that you can add into a keto diet. It's not like a carnivore diet, which is like another level of extreme. But true, whatever helps your performance. I mean, I think that people just have to be cognizant of it and attempt to at least look at the food they're eating. You even mentioned you've done these like gut biome things. Yeah.
Food topic, I think what's most important, like you pick any diet you want, doesn't really matter. The most important thing is just stop eating sugar, right? Like, we're not stop, but like reduce it as far as possible. I'm not saying don't have desserts if you like desserts, but like generally, I don't care what diet you pick, just have less sugar, and you're probably 80% of the way there.
You're not wrong. I think that's probably one of the most toxic things you put in your body. I haven't killed alcohol completely, but I think as you go through life, you start to realize that it's not a net benefit to most things you do. And you get older, you start to lose days to alcohol with the hangover and whatnot. So you're like, whatever. And also if you don't have that social anxiety, then it's perfect. And if you do have social anxiety, that is a skill that you can actually work on. So I think that that's something that you should actually incorporate as well. I haven't gotten rid of caffeine. I don't know if you've done that, but
I'm a natural introvert. So like social settings are hard for me, especially in large groups. So alcohol used to be a lubricant. I found other ways to deal with that and exercise that muscle to replace that, which I think is healthier in the long run, right?
So what do you do? That's very, let's speak about that quickly, because I think that's the one reason why people do drink.
Yeah. So I hate large groups, right? Like if I'm picking a social setting, I want kind of 5 or less people. So large groups is very challenging for me. I don't like groups of new people. So like natural introvert, but I can be extroverted. It's just a muscle that I have to practice on and be very conscious of it and know I'm walking into this situation. I need to change this and do this, right? Mm-hmm. The way I force that muscle to work is I volunteer in organizations like EO and YPO now, and put myself in a leadership position where I have to talk to people, right? Now I have to walk into a room of 100 people and I have no option, right? Like I can't go play on my phone. I can't go do something else. I can't not go to the event. So like putting myself forcefully in that position where there's zero option makes that muscle, kind of be exercised.
I love that. And you don't get, being a natural introvert, when you first started doing that, how did you overcome that initial panic? Because I think that that's also a great skill to practice, just putting yourself in front of audiences. I've never equated that to a social setting, but come to think of it, if you can talk in front of an audience, I guess you can talk in front of a group of people at a party. But you never had like a panic attack or anything like that when you're putting yourself out there? Because I know that I
have an eternal panic attack every time I'm in one of those settings.
But you've learned to manage it to a degree.
Yeah, I had to confront it, right? And be like, okay, I know why I'm feeling this way. It's okay. I know how I'm going to manage through it. I actually have no problem speaking in front of a large group of people on a stage. That doesn't bother me at all. But in a social setting, that bothers me, right? And
that's so
I'm okay with it, right? Like I accept it and I say, That's fine. I understand the feeling. I'm going to accept the feeling, and I'm going to use the tools I've developed over time to get through it. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It's actually very difficult, right? Like if I'm not in that forced setting, it's really hard for me, right?
You know what I love? I'm happy that we just sort of started going down this path, because I feel like the average entrepreneur, especially when they're starting out, they do not think that a lot of their personality can be molded and built upon. I feel like they just go through life, especially again, very, very young entrepreneurs, and they feel like, okay, this is how I am, and I have to play within the confines of what my personality is. And if I'm not somebody who feels that they can put themselves in front of large groups, I'm not going to be the evangelistic CEO, and that's just not my role. I'm a tech person, I'm a product person. But I actually love how you force yourself to go into these really, really uncomfortable situations. And then from the outside looking in, you do look like the evangelistic, being able to put on a show in front of an audience. I've seen some of your talks where you're, running up and down the stage, getting people to do standing ovations to get the energy up in the room. Like, you do it very well. So this is definitely something that you can learn and you can practice and you can refine, and then it becomes this tool in your arsenal that's just, it makes you a more powerful and effective individual.
It's just this skill like any other, right?
Yeah.
But I think what people need to understand is, like, I think everyone who does those things, no matter what it is, has some level of uncomfort, right? And now we're just talking about the level of uncomfort. Is it high or is it medium or is it low? But there's never zero uncomfort, right? So across all of those things, we have different levels of how uncomfortable we are, and we just have to push through those. And we all can do all of the pieces, right? As long as we're willing to accept it. Like, one of my core values as a person is life begins at the edge, right? So I'm willing to accept that uncomfortability is okay and it is good, right? Like, that's how we grow, how we get better. So I've accepted that in my life.
You work with tons of founders now. Do you feel like the individuals that have the highest chance of being successful are individuals that think the same way as you regarding uncomfort and putting themselves out there and sort of refining their skill sets? Do you feel like that's like a necessity to be a success?
I think it's a necessity to be willing to learn and grow. How you get there, I think, is less important, right? For me, I thrive in the uncomfortability. I think there are a lot of people who think about this now. There's been a number of books written about it, that this is a reasonable way to do it. I don't think it's the only way. But I do think that the best founders, the best business owners are people that are willing to learn and grow and have conversations like, maybe the company's outgrown me, maybe I've outgrown the company, but either way, like, I'm pushing forward. Those, I think, are the most successful people.
And when you look at again, just because you have a huge sample size to sort of get insight and data from, the founders that you invest in, they've all passed like the $1 million threshold, more or less. What are some of the biggest mistakes they're still making at the $1 million mark?
So at the $1 million mark, I think it's still a lot of questioning marketing channels and not being willing to try other things and then double down on where it's working, right? Like, I think there's a lot of talk about, like, always trying the new channels, and it's a balancing act, right? Like, there should be a bunch of stuff you're testing to find new channels, but there should also be like, this channel's working. I am going to double, triple, and quadruple down and just keep banging at it, right? And I think people fall into the trap of like, well, I need organic things, I need free marketing, I need influencers. No. Like, very simply, if you've got to that product market fit, you should be finding and identifying channels that you can put $1 in and get $2 out or $5 out or whatever, and creating that money machine, right? Like, that's how you get exponential growth, is finding those channels, right?
Go ahead, sorry.
I think that people fall into the trap of this influencer or free marketing, and that works for some companies, right? Like, think back to 37 Signals and Basecamp. That worked for them. It is almost an unrepeatable process and set of practices, right? Like, everyone tried it, right? And we saw it didn't work, right? But everyone has tried Google AdWords, and as soon as you find it's working, it works, right?
Yeah. I mean, but that's, I mean, So I'm actually curious because you spoke about product market fit. I would even argue that a company that has hit $1 million could have just hustled their way to $1 million. So it doesn't necessarily mean they have product market fit at 1 million just because they're hitting that threshold by any means, or they have a bit of it, but it's not like they could turn it into a $100 million plus company just because they can hit the 1 million. I am curious about what you look for in true product market fit. What is the signal? What is the leading indicator? Is it the one marketing channel that is converting at, you make $2 for every $1 spent? Like, what is yours as an investor, the thing that you need to see before you have the confidence to put money into them? There's not just $1 million in annual revenue. Somebody can just hustle there.
$1 million is like a rough proxy for product market fit. It's rough. Like, to your point, it's not perfect. I think it's you have to have at least one channel that's a machine, right? And now you might not have enough money to put into the machine, but like you've proven that it's a machine that is doable. At least one other channel you think could be a machine. And then I look for what is the referral amount happening within the company, right? Like word of mouth, not any other channel, but like word of mouth. Are customers telling their peers about this?
That's smart.
And that also includes enterprise software, right? Like I think we ignore it a lot of times in enterprise software. It's not just consumer, but really the best companies all had this. They all had referrals happening within the companies, and they had word of mouth as a big channel. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's big.
When you try and measure that, is that something as simple as when somebody's checking out, you're asking where you heard about it, or is there a more effective way to actually measure word of mouth? Because I think that's a great benchmark for product market fit. It's if someone's telling their friends about you, awesome. But I mean, if it's enterprise B2B, yes, but enterprise B2B, the sales cycle, the sales process is so convoluted. How are you actually going to find out if that next customer came from a referral?
Yeah. So first of all, I think a lot of enterprise sales is convoluted for no reason. That's the first problem. But then we get into kind of how do you do attribution? And I'm a big believer in the most simple attribution models, not complex software, not anything else. Very simply, how'd you hear about us? A drop down, you pick it, right? Like that's it. There's nothing else. And that includes enterprise software. You can include that on the contract form. You can include that on the intake. You can do it all sorts of places, but it's very simply a drop down of those things. And what's interesting is people always say that doesn't work, whatever. And yes, there are problems, right? Like we never ran a television ad, but we had television in the drop down and people selected it. Okay. So maybe they thought they heard it on TV, right? But what matters is the percentages and how those percentages change over time. And then looking for consumer product at the DMAs, right? Like if I'm running ads in DMA 1, is my percentage of radio going up in the how did you hear about us in that DMA? That's what matters. Nothing else, right?
All right, let's wrap this up. We've gone through pretty much everything that I wanted to pick your brain about. So let's I guess I'll ask you, is there anything that you wanted to leave the audience with, an entrepreneur that's building something, some last words of wisdom, or if there's something that we didn't go into, we can go into that too. But I think we did everything. We talked about Grasshopper, we talked about selling, we talked about just some entrepreneurial stuff, investing stuff, health and wellness. I mean, what other shit do you do? What
I don't know. Just built a large Formula One event for YPO here in Las Vegas.
Oh, for real? Oh, that's awesome.
But I would say like the one thing I would leave people with is an interesting metric that I've found that is a good predictor for success within startups. And it doesn't necessarily make sense, but across a large sample set, this has been the case. The founders that send regular email updates about the company are more successful than those that don't. Like, very simply, it doesn't even really matter what's in the update. It doesn't even really matter the cadence as long as it's more than once a year. Like, if it's quarterly, if it's monthly, if it's a mix, but like a regular cadence that is stuck to and a regular set of things that are reported, those founders are more successful.
Why do you think that is?
I think it comes back to process and, structured thought, right? Like they're willing to think about things in a structured way. So they're probably not frenetically running around doing crazy things. They're structuring their time, their processes, their thoughts, all of those things.
Yeah.
it comes across as this email update.
I love that. And it also gives you insight as to what they're working on, so you can probably provide more support if you see something that can actually be that you can help with.
The best founders include a section at the end that says like asks, like very specific. This week or this month or this quarter, my ask is this. If you can help, let me know.
You know, it's so funny. It's such like a simple thing that a founder should be okay with, especially if they're taking money from somebody. But like, why wouldn't you ask for help? It seems like silly to not ask for help. But I guess people they get in their own head about I need to solve all the problems, and if somebody trusts me with their money, they're trusting me to have all the answers, which is so not the reality. But I think some founders think that, and they don't ask for help, and then the money's gone.
So I think as humans, we're bad at asking for help.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. Where should people go and connect with you? Where do you want to send people now? Where do you want to push people? You have a website, social, any links you want to drop, and also what are you personally like working on in the future that people can be excited about?
Yeah, so davidhauser.com, Hauscr. I'm sure we can put in the show notes or whatever else. I have a weekly email that I send out kind of talking about all of these topics, a few topics each week, kind of what I'm thinking about, reading, doing. Have about 15,000 people that are now subscribed to that. I really love that. Like, that's one of the things I'm most focused on a weekly basis is kind of, obviously I do a lot of research and thinking, but distilling that down is a really fun activity for me. And I've loved it over the past, I think 4 or 5 years I've done it now. From a what am I doing next perspective, I'm not sure. I'm in this stage right now of thinking about that. We just exited a few assets and starting to kind of clean things up a little bit to have some focused thinking time about what I spend my time on now. And I'm not sure yet, to be honest.
Well, I guess subscribe to the newsletter and they'll find out. By the way, I absolutely love writing. It is the most relaxing practice, and it just clarifies your thinking and it organizes everything in your brain. It's by far one of the best ways to just decompress, I think, for people that are always on the go and have so many different things on their plate. It's actually
I've become a better sharer because of it, like as a human being, like in all parts of my life, because I'm willing to think about what I actually think and as an opinion and not just consuming other people's opinions, and be critical, but also be able to share and be able to share in a way that is open and honest with people and bring people in, rather than a, kind of abrasive way of sharing. And that,
I think it's a beautiful format because when you're just discussing ideas in a room, again, not everybody will put their hand up and say, I disagree with you. And also in the moment, you don't actually have a ton of time to do the research. Usually you're just leaning on, your learned experiences, which include tons of biases in the information you're bringing to the table, like in that very moment. But when you write, two things happen. You're allowed to research conflicting perspectives and points of views. And then also, you can tell if your communication resonates with people because they'll either subscribe and interact or not. There's no need for them to engage with your material. There's no need for them to engage with basically your brain if they don't need to. Like, they may feel they are forced to if you're in a boardroom with somebody who you've invested in, or a coworker or a peer. So it really creates this arena that forces you to think critically and to present ideas and learn how to communicate your thoughts in a way that I don't think there's any other arena like it. Even this type of format, like we're coming to the table with what we already know. We're discussing what we already know. We're not researching. We're not bringing in outside information in this particular hour and a half segment. So it's a really great way to just, for somebody who values how they think and how they communicate, I love it. And I think you're totally on, your points are 100% correct. 2 questions to wrap this up. You've had an incredible career. I would ask you, if you had to tell your 20-year-old self one thing, what would that be?
So I'll go back to one of my other core values as a person. The journey matters, right? Like I really don't like looking back and saying, change this, do that, do whatever. Like, all of the things that happen for a reason. All the hard things, all the great things, all the bad things. Like all of that matters. And that makes me who I am today. So I would really tell myself like the journey matters. And then be okay with that uncomfortable parts of life. Like if I was okay with that as a younger person, I'm sure I would have done better, right? Like I just would have, but I ran away from uncomfort, right? I ran away from social settings. I ran away from this and filled it with something else. So, you know, it's hard, but for me looking back, it doesn't matter.
If you look at what you've built, you look at the professional successes, also you've built an incredible family, so personal successes as well. At this point in your life, what does success really mean for you?
Success for me is all related to happiness now, right? Like I no longer look at, return on capital. I look at happiness. Like what are the things that I'm doing that are going to make me most happy? What are the things that people around me are going to be most happy, right? Like that's what I value and how I kind of judge my success now. Like I don't need more money. I didn't change my life after the exit of Grasshopper. Like I don't really care about things, other personal core value, experience over things, right? So like none of that really matters. But as an entrepreneur, I still love the measuring stick of capital and dollars, right? Like, because that is how you measure success in this world, right? That's not what I'm optimizing for, but yeah, do I want to have $1 billion exit or whatever? Sure, because that only is measuring contribution to some extent. And I don't know another way to measure that, but the dollars itself don't matter, right? It's the measuring that matters.